So we are moving fast in this morning. We are entering the fourth topic of this Planetiers World Gathering. It calls Future Fit Business, How to Be Strategic with Sustainability. Our guest is Geoff Kendall, founder and CEO, Future Fit Foundation, and the moderator will be our known and good friend and partner, John Elkington.
Thank you, Pedro. Let me just say a few words about Geoff before he starts his presentation. When I think about the sustainable business field, there are very few people like Geoff who are not simply talking about the need for sustainability, but are developing the next generation of tools to make sure that business and investors and governments can make sense of all of this. And Geoff started off with a number of tech startups in the IT space. Then joyfully, at least on my side, he joined a company I set up in 1987 called Sustainability, and was there very successfully for a number of years. And then he went off to found the Future Fit Foundation. And I should declare an interest. I've been on the advisory board there more or less since Future Fit began. I've been astonished to see how it's all evolved. So well done, Geoff. And if I may, I'll hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, John, for a very kind intro. Hopefully everyone's going to be able to see my slides shortly. Can you see my slides, John?
Let me unmute myself. No, I can't yet.
Okay. All right, maybe slight technical hitch. Hopefully I'll catch up. So a little bit about me. As John said, I'm CEO and co-founder of Future Fit Foundation. There we go. Fantastic. John called himself an optimist, which, having had many discussions with him, I can absolutely vouch for. I think of myself more as a possibilist. I think I wake up every day an optimist. By the time I go to bed, I'm probably more of a pessimist, but since you're getting me at 10:30 in the morning, hopefully we'll end up with a fairly positive message here today. So we're a UK charity, and our mission is to catalyse a rapid and radical transformation in the global economy. Our work involves translating system science into practical tools to help organisations of all shapes and sizes build businesses that are fit for the 21st century. So here you see some of the companies and investors we work with closely as members of what we call our Development Council, and they've really helped us co-create and evolve our work over the past 7 years. Now, our work at Future Fit starts very much with the end in mind. So for everyone on Earth to have the opportunity to lead healthy and fulfilling lives, we need an economy which is environmentally restorative, socially just, and economically inclusive. I'm sure everyone will agree that's a great destination to aim for, but of course the big question is, how do we get there? So we already have something to aim for, and John already mentioned the SDGs, which offer a shared vision for the global problems we must solve within a generation. And when the UN launched the SDGs in 2015, the ambition was to turn the tide on all of these issues by 2030. But the truth is, of course, with 10 years to go to that deadline, we're nowhere near on track to reaching a single SDG. In fact, on any number of socioeconomic or environmental dimensions, things are moving in the wrong direction. On all of these graphs that you see here, about 3/4 of the way along on the horizontal axis, you can see a red number. That date is 1950. That is around the time that all the world's nation states started measuring progress and prosperity using a metric called GDP, which we'll come back to in a second. And in almost every case, you can see how rapidly our impacts have been increasing since that point. But we don't need graphs to tell us that. Every day there seems to be some new headline about climate change, biodiversity loss, urban poverty, ocean waste, or some other looming crisis. So how did we get into this mess, and how can we get out of it? This is a quote from one of my biggest heroes, the systems theorist Donella Meadows. It's rather obvious when you see it like this. If you define the goal of society as GDP, that society will do its best to produce GDP. It will not produce welfare, equity, justice, or efficiency unless you define a goal and regularly measure and report the state of welfare, equity, justice, or efficiency. Put simply, GDP is a measure of how much money is flowing through the system. It says nothing about the quality of the outcomes which result from all those financial transactions. So this is kind of like sitting in a car and slamming down on the gas pedal to get the rev counter as high as possible without stopping to check whether the car is actually in gear and heading in a useful direction. And because GDP has been the overriding metric which we've been using since soon after World War II, our global economy has basically evolved to become a GDP maximization engine. So to give ourselves a fighting chance of realizing the SDGs, we need to go beyond focusing on GDP. And that means introducing new flows of what we might call extra financial information, which can capture the full social and environmental impacts of our actions, and thus help us all play our part in delivering the outcomes we need. This applies to every socioeconomic actor, but in particular to companies, to those who invest in them, and to the governments which regulate how business is done. So first, let's look at companies. How can the average CEO be sure that her business is helping and not hindering the SDGs? What part must her company play to prevent poverty or halt climate change or foster responsible consumption and production? Business leaders need a way to understand and measure the extra financial impacts of their decisions in a holistic way, both the benefits they're seeking to deliver as well as understanding any unintended side effects which may be caused as a result. And investors can only consistently steer their capital toward companies who are part of the solution if they can tell who those companies are. We don't have time to get into all the reasons today, but suffice to say that current environmental, social, and governance data embodied in sustainability reports and ESG ratings are not fit for purpose. In fact, they often send the wrong signals, so that companies that are least bad within an industry might be applauded as leaders, even if their entire industry is fundamentally unsustainable. So what we need is much more concise, comparable, and forward-looking extra financial data from companies, which helps investors understand the full systemic risks and opportunities in their portfolios. And finally, governments. Governments require guidance on how to put in place the rules and incentives needed to scale up and speed up the transition to future fitness by making it economically rewarding for all market actors to pursue. It's really not rocket science to design policies which favour clean energy use, penalise waste generation, support retraining for green sector jobs, and ban unfair employment practices. But those policies have to be developed in a joined up way to reduce the likelihood that intended outcomes come at the cost of unintended consequences. So this is what Future Fit is all about. Our long-term vision is to enable these new flows of extra financial information through the global economy. The aim is to equip and encourage all key market actors with the guidance and data they need to take better day-to-day decisions in pursuit of the SDGs. Now, John talked about green swans. Well, if our work at Future Fit succeeds, everyone will be able to spot which ugly ducklings have the potential to become green swans so that they can be given the support they need to flourish. So what does Future Fit look like in practice? Well, we've known for decades what system science tells us about what the Earth needs. So how to live within planetary boundaries and to uphold our social foundations that we depend upon. This is a diagram which summarizes some of that science founded by an organization called The Natural Step. All of this is published in academic literature and has been peer reviewed and used over a period of many years as the framework for strategic sustainable development. And these are the system conditions within which society would have to operate to ensure the possibility of human flourishing on Earth forever. Now, this is great, but it's quite abstract. What does this mean for the average business? That's the question that we have set out to answer with Future Fit. So first off, we translated that into a set of properties of what a Future Fit society would look like. So here you can see all of those properties. These are the things that we would be able to say are true once we reach the point of having an environmentally restorative, socially just, economically inclusive future. Now that's a good start, but of course, what does that mean for an individual company? Well, to figure that out, what we did is we looked at business impacts across two dimensions. The first is negative impacts versus positive on the vertical axis there. And then on the horizontal axis, there's what businesses do themselves versus the impacts that are caused by their existence, for example, through their customers' use of their products or through the supply chains that they rely upon. And what we've done is we've mapped out what businesses should be held accountable for and what businesses can do and should be recognized for to improve our global impacts beyond their own four walls. So firstly, that bottom left quadrant, the things that a business is in control of that are causing a negative impact, every business in the world has an obligation to address these. And we refer to this as the extra financial break-even point that all businesses need to reach. So everyone understands the idea of a financial break-even point, that you have to make as much money as you spend, or you're not going to be in business very long. Well, the extra financial break-even point is reaching those social and environmental thresholds that ensure that a business is in no way causing harm. Now, this is in the form of what we see here, 23 break-even goals, and companies should be striving to hit those to ensure that they're not making progress towards this. Now, then at the other side of the coin, of course, there are plenty of ways that businesses can and do have a positive impact on the world. And that comes in the other three quadrants. So they can work to help others reduce their negative impacts. They can have a positive impact themselves, for example, through the goods and services they provide, or they might amplify the positive impacts of others. So for example, spotting ugly ducklings that could become green swans and investing in them. And what we've done here is translate that, again grounded in the system science, into a set of outcomes called positive pursuits, which together capture all of the ways that we can actually improve progress toward the SDGs. Okay, so the two sides together, the break-even goals and the positive pursuits, effectively characterize all kinds of business impact in a holistic way to both guide decisions and help us measure progress and talk about that progress. Now, in terms of what the benchmark actually is and how you use it, I'll very briefly go through this. So FutureFit is designed to bring extra financial performance management into the core of business. So it's a self-assessment methodology. So this is something that any company, any of you today could go to futurefitbusiness.org and download all of our guidance to understand what it is exactly you have to do against all these break-even goals. And each one of them has around 30 or 40 pages of guidance explaining how to pursue that and how to measure progress and so forth. And you can use that within your business. And we've got a number of businesses. We'll be hearing from one of them later, Chris Davis, the CSO of The Body Shop, who is actually starting to embed this into all the decisions they make as an organization. But then also, if you remember, what we want to do is improve the flows of information through our economy. So what we've also done is we've designed a new kind of disclosure called the FutureFit Statement of Progress, which is around helping businesses articulate what they're doing, where they're going and why, and how they're going to get there, to give that kind of rich extra financial information to guide investment decisions. Now, there's well over 700 pages of guidance in the FutureFit methodology. Again, all of this is freely downloadable. We also have video-based training that people can watch if they don't want to wade through all of that documentation. So you can find all that on our website. But I'm just going to talk about how organizations are already using this to improve their strategies going forward. So John showed a variant of this diagram here and how we've moved to this more systemic view of this triple bottom line, where what we realize, if we look through a systems lens, is that business can only thrive if society flourishes, and society can only flourish if we live within the carrying capacity of our finite planet. And that's what we talk about in terms of generating not shareholder value or shared value, but system value. But if we take this systems view of the world, this can actually be quite informative to the way we think about the pressures on our businesses. So here, some of you may recognize this diagram as Porter's 5 forces. So this is a model that's taught in all MBA programs around how companies should think about the environment within which they operate in terms of pressures from suppliers, industry rivals, and so forth. And this is how CEOs and CFOs have been thinking about the system within which they operate for many years now. Now that is helpful, but in today's world is myopic. What we really need to do is zoom out and understand that those 5 forces operate within a broader socioeconomic and environmental context. And there are increasing pressures from our national systems and the strain we're putting them under, and from the societal context as well. And as John referred to, the recent political unrest and so forth is just one manifestation of that. And then increasingly, the technological context, as we see incredible new advances in things like gene therapy, 3D printing, and so forth. So let's just take one example of how this can actually be used to start thinking more broadly about the business landscape. This is all about enriching our systems intelligence to build new kinds of responsible, regenerative, and resilient businesses. Here's an example. Novo Nordisk, one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies, make 40% of the world's insulin, which helps diabetes sufferers lead healthy, productive lives. Now, who is Novo Nordisk's biggest potential competitor over the coming years? Well, if you look at the 5 forces world, you would say, well, it's the next biggest provider of insulin, right? They're the kind of biggest threat within their industry. But look beyond that, and it's more likely to be companies like Apple, because the wearable technology such as the Apple Watch that's coming out today can already do things like measure heart rates and anomalies there. And these companies are looking at ways to measure blood sugar with those devices. Now imagine if your Apple Watch could tap you on the wrist whenever you need a sugary snack or whenever you need to walk around the block to get some exercise, and that could help you manage your diabetes to the point that you need far less insulin. Well, at that point, Novo Nordisk's current business model could be in jeopardy. So looking at these interacting, what we call Future Fit 8 forces, helps you anticipate these things that are coming. And what we would suggest is that all CEOs and boards should really ask themselves 3 questions. First, what societal need do you currently address, and how do you do it? So that's a different question to saying, what products do you sell? What is the need you're addressing? And secondly, what unique knowledge and competencies do you as an organization possess? Novo Nordisk, for example, has tremendous amount of knowledge around diabetes and the impacts and the way diabetes is caused and how that can be prevented as well as treated. It also has huge expertise in synthesizing very complex molecules at large scale. So, could those things be deployed in completely different ways? And then thirdly, how can we leverage what makes us unique as a business in the face of these macro level forces to identify and pursue the kind of exponential green swan solutions that John introduced us to earlier? So quickly then, to sum up how FutureFit's being used today, late last year we had the world's first pension fund issue a FutureFit mandate, saying they actually want companies that they're investing in to start telling them how FutureFit they are becoming. And if companies listen to anyone, it's the investors who provide them with capital, so that's great. We had, again, late last year, the world's first company issued their first FutureFit integrated report. This is a publicly listed travel company in New Zealand. And we're also partnering with the UN Global Compact to run workshops in many of their local networks around the world, including Portugal, on how FutureFit can help businesses of all shapes and sizes to respond authentically and ambitiously to the SDGs. They were due to happen around now. They've been pushed back due to the coronavirus, and many of those events will now happen virtually in Q1 and Q2 of next year for obvious reasons. So one thing we've got coming is over the last few years, we've had a lot of people get in touch with us and say, how can we use FutureFit in our own organizations? And many of those people to start with were in the consulting community, realizing that Future Fit would help them to push their corporate customers to make more progress. And what we said was, yes, you can use Future Fit in whatever way you want. This is a public good. We've created this and we're publishing it under a Creative Commons license, so you don't even have to tell us you're using it. But a lot of those advisors came back and said, well, can we say we know what we're doing? Which of course is a different question. So what we did is we came up with an accredited partner and certified professional program. So we now have an army of certified professionals around the world. I think it's currently at the level of 60 or 70 people, and will probably be double that within the next 6 to 9 months, which can help companies to understand how to apply the benchmark. But over the last year or so, we've had a lot of companies say, we've been using this for a while now, and we're ready to tell the world how we're doing and where we're going and why. So I'm really excited to announce that in November, we're launching what we call the Future Fit Pioneer program for companies that are on a trajectory to becoming Future Fit and want to tell the world where they are, where they're going, and help encourage others to come along for the journey too. So we're really pleased about that. Now, let's imagine we get enough businesses and investors signing up to be Future Fit pioneers. And let's imagine that we start to get government attention on creating joined up policies that foster Future Fit solutions. What will that economy then look like? Well, to go back to the 3 R's John mentioned, we're going to have a new conception of what it means to be responsible. Companies will be working continuously to eliminate their negative impacts, not just to be slightly better than their peers or slightly better than they were last year. Investors will use their capital to push for business transformation because they will understand the systemic risks in their portfolios. We will also have regeneration, so companies will actively develop and be able to incubate green swan solutions, and investors will use their capital to scale those solutions at speed. And then finally, all this will add up to more resilience, both within businesses and the communities that they serve. So businesses will address risks holistically and preemptively so that we get this greater ability to withstand unforeseen and unpredicted system shocks. And that's what a Future Fit economy is all about. And I will leave it there and hand back to John. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Geoff. I'm going to just ask a very quick technical question. I mean, English has become the operating language of business for better or worse. It won't necessarily stay that way. So what is Future Fit doing to ensure that all of your hundreds of pages of guidance and so on are available in multiple languages?
Yeah, it's a very good question, John. We are a small team. We only have 13 people, all based in London. So our ability to translate into all the world's major languages is pretty low, to be fair. That said, we recognize the need to do so. We've already worked with one partner in Japan to translate most of the core methodology into Japanese, which was fantastic. They did all the work for us. And we worked with them to make sure that still met exactly the right sense and so forth. We would be delighted to work with others in Portuguese in particular, also in Spanish, Chinese, and so forth, to be able to really raise awareness and adoption of this work. I think it does actually help as well that what we've done is translate most of our core guidance around what the benchmark is and how to use it into video-based training material with a full script that people can follow, because that often makes it easier for people to grasp the key concepts, even if they're not native English speakers. But yes, ultimately, we need to be translating into other languages too.
Thank you. And I'm old enough to remember when Alvin Toffler wrote a book or published a book called Future Shock. And I just wondered, in the companies where Future Fit is being absorbed, what sort of cultural responses do you see? Because this is complexity at a very different level. You've done a remarkable job to simplify it in a way, but it's still complicated. And there are people who just say, that's no part of my job description to do all of that. The 23 different sort of targets or whatever. So what sort of cultural responses are you seeing?
Yeah, that's been really interesting, actually. What we've done is for each of the break-even goals, we've created what we call an action guide, which only focuses on what that goal means and how you actually pursue it. So, for example, there's an action guide around procurement, which is around 40 pages long. But that's perfect for the sustainability team to be able to hand to the procurement team and say, all you need to worry about is this, and here's how it will contribute to the whole and our overall strategy. Likewise, around employee goals, around operational goals such as energy efficiency and water use and so forth. So what we find in companies is actually, rather than the sustainability teams going and trying to push people within the organization to look at 23 things at once, this is a way for the sustainability team to be more of a focal point and a provider of actionable guidance to those other teams. And typically, the responses of those other teams has been great, because we're talking about individuals here who understand these challenges. They just don't really know what to do about it. And what they find with Future Fit is that helps them to take better day-to-day decisions in a way that they can see how what they're doing bubbles up to improve the company performance as a whole.
So if you're in a company, thank you, if you're in a company and you're looking out at the landscape of all of these different propositions and agendas and offerings and so on, it's a pretty busy and complicated landscape. So I wonder, there are people like Global Reporting Initiative and the International Integrated Reporting Council and SASB, and it's not quite endless, but huge number of different competing platforms out there. And I suspect as sustainability really now drives into the mainstream, you're going to see not less of that, but more of it. I mean, you'll have some consolidation and convergence, but a lot more competition. What sort of response have you had in that almost sort of market space from people who may feel that they're the incumbents and you're an insurgent?
Yeah, I think it's varied. Some people have said this is great, actually. So, for example, GRI guidance, right? Companies that have been reporting against the GRI standards for many years are probably already routinely capturing the kinds of data that they need to be able to calculate their future fitness as they are today, which is great. So it's really helpful that those standards have been in place and people have been pursuing them. On the other hand, I think what we're starting to realize is there is massive reporting fatigue within companies. And the last thing the world needs is yet another reporting framework, right? Yet another thing to explain what we're doing and in a slightly different way. And that's why we're really clear to point out that Future Fit is more of a management methodology. This is about how you set better ambitions within the business that align with both your business success and that of society, take better day-to-day decisions in pursuit of those ambitions, and then finally simplify the way you talk about your progress in a much more structured, concise, comparable, and future-looking way. And so I think that third thing, the ability to then disclose details of what you're doing, is more of a consequence of embedding this within the business. Whereas most things out there are reporting frameworks that try to work backwards, say, well, we want you to talk about this, so we hope this is going to help you embed it. And what we're finding is that switch has been really helpful, and we get a lot of organizations really enthusiastic about this. In terms of those reporting standards themselves, insofar as is possible, we are aligning with their guidance. So, for example, we're working on a mapping to help anyone who is using the GRI standards to understand how do you plug that in to calculate your future fitness. Likewise, with SASB, what we're doing is we're working on what we call heat maps, which is a way to help any company in any industry understand what are its most likely negative impacts or the highest negative impacts across different break-even goals, and what are the least likely to be impactful based on the kind of business they're in. So again, aligning with those other standards insofar as possible to complement them rather than to basically say, just use this one.
Yeah. You said earlier on that a number of the businesses that you're working with are getting to the point where they want to talk externally about what they are finding. Is one problem with that a bit like Puma under Jochen Zeitz when he was chairman and CEO there, they did, I think in 2011, their environmental profit and loss exercise. What they discovered, as you'll remember, through their supply chain, was that a very large proportion of their profits would have to be paid out to the rest of the world if they formally took all of this on board. So are you finding it used to be lawyers who would protest sort of changes like this being adopted, reporting and the rest of it. Are you finding any pushback both from companies but also from people who hold the shares, the stocks in companies, who may feel that a big slice of the profitability might disappear?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think one of the ways we differ quite significantly from the kind of environmental profit loss approach is we are not trying to put a dollar value on environmental or social impacts, which is an extremely difficult thing to do. And you get into problematic situations where people think they can trade off one impact against another. So, for example, if you have a value ascribed to maintaining a hectare of rainforest in Brazil and a value ascribed to people having healthy pregnancies in rural India, those two things can't be netted out. It doesn't work like that. So we've avoided going that route. In terms of when you look at your future fitness, yeah, you're absolutely right. Some companies do get a bit nervous about this because they think, well, actually, if we look at how future fit we are with respect to procurement, we just don't know. We don't know where half of our raw materials come from. We don't know if they're coming from places which suffer from water scarcity and if we're exacerbating that water stress. We don't know if there might be issues of child labour 40 years back in our supply chains. So all our guidance helps them to figure that stuff out. But the reality is it's going to take many years to hit some of these goals. Now, some people get very nervous about saying that to the world. But what I've been really encouraged with is the number of companies who realise that actually, if they're talking about the challenges of getting there, that's better than staying silent, because they are getting asked about this stuff increasingly. So far better to have a clear position and say, here's where we're going and here's why, and here's where we expect to be by this year and here's why, can be really helpful. And the other thing to mention is that some of the companies are actually starting to realise that this gives them license to lobby for more progressive legislation from governments to say, actually, we can't hit this goal right now because it's not economically viable. And that's why we need, for example, a carbon tax.
Yeah. So thank you. Then in the cartoon that I showed in my presentation, Ingram Pinn of the Financial Times did it for me back in 1991, so a very long time ago. But the robot was on the right-hand side of the board table in that illustration. And the question there is, do you see potential for expert systems and artificial intelligence of one sort or another to make this easier for people, but also to help people benchmark and compare and learn as they go along?
Yeah, so two thoughts on that. Firstly, we do tend to leap on things as good ideas, and I'm sure everyone a few years ago couldn't move for stories about blockchain and how blockchain was going to completely transform our supply chains, and of course it hasn't happened, and there is no silver bullet here. Machine learning is really only as good as the data you can put into it. And part of the problem, as we've talked about, is the quality of the data flowing through the system is not great. There is, however, one area where I think AI and machine learning could come in incredibly useful, and that is when you start to look at satellite data. Because we can now start to understand at a much more granular level, down to 10 square meters, where water stress is affecting things, where vegetation is changing year on year, and so forth. And there's actually been some work done which ties that geographical information to things like bills of lading, which is the kind of standard way of exchanging information about products that are transferred and natural resources that are transferred and shipped between one region and another. And you can start to pin it down to understand the flows of natural resources around the world and whether they are contributing to environmental problems and potentially even social problems in particular regions. So I think that can augment company reported information. but it's not going to replace it anytime soon.
Thank you. And I've got a couple of final questions. We've got about 5 minutes to run before we open this out and invite three panelists in. And the question, and I only ask it to embarrass you because I know it's something you haven't done yet, but how long is it going to take for you to do this for cities too? Because you would have thought cities have an urgent need to sort of take on board this sort of model as well.
Yeah, so this is probably one of the reasons I mentioned I go to bed a pessimist. I think we have a fantastic team, and we've worked on how to develop the future fit approach so that it could apply to any social system. And by social system, I mean any kind of human enterprise. And obviously the first we focused on is business. Right? But the idea is that we can apply the same process we've gone through to create a future fit city benchmark and a future fit country benchmark, grounded in the same system science in a way that will complement the work of future fit business. And I think this will really start to help things in a way that no other initiative does, because you can imagine if a city is pursuing future fitness and talking about how well it's doing with regard to things like water recycling, energy use, waste treatment, and so forth, then that becomes a very desirable location for a business that wants to be future fit. Likewise, any business that's offering solutions that can themselves improve a customer's future fitness, well, they can then sell to cities that are themselves becoming future fit. So you end up with a kind of self-reinforcing future fit marketplace. So yes, we really want to get the cities benchmark done. We don't think it will actually take us that long, but it all comes down to time and money. So if there's anyone listening that can help a small non-profit in the UK running on a shoestring budget to basically give us the time to be able to put this together, we would love to have it out in the market within the next year.
So another internal market. I love the sound of it. The final question, and it probably comes in two parts, is firstly, what impact has COVID-19 had on the enthusiasm of businesses, your primary target market, in terms of not only adopting this, but actually making it a reality, implementing it? And if you think 2030 in your dreams or nightmares, what will Future Fit be doing then, Geoff, that it's not doing now?
Right. So in terms of the COVID response, I think we've seen two different responses. One is the immediate one, which is everything has to go on hold for the next 3 months. This is thinking back in March, April, because we just need to figure out how to keep putting food in our employees' mouths. As simple as that. But it really galvanized leadership teams within companies into realizing, yes, this is actually really core to business. And this really helps us understand that resilience is critical. And we've had the illusion that society is a well-oiled machine. But actually, something as simple as a virus can cause, rapid economic collapse. And to think that within the first few months of this pandemic, governments around the world had already injected far more cash into the economy than happened over the entire financial crisis a decade ago is incredible. So I think one useful thing out of this is that when governments realize how urgent problems are, money can be found to support solutions that solve them. And I'm hoping that as we get more and more companies and pension funds and other large asset owners paying attention to Future Fit, they can actually start putting pressure on governments to put the right regulation in place. And that comes to the second part of your question. I would hope that over the next decade, we can start to really influence the regulations around markets to help set the playing field such that the pursuit of future fit outcomes, or green swans, actually becomes something which is the most economically rewarding thing to do because the right incentives are in place for that. So ideal world would be that by 2030, every company in the world is reporting on its extra financial performance as concisely and meaningfully as currently happens with its financial performance. So fingers crossed for that.
My fingers are crossed too, Geoff. Thank you very much indeed. And now please stay with us, because we've now got three extraordinary panelists, one of whom you've said already, Chris Davis of The Body Shop, is implementing Future Fit's methodology. I'm hoping that our other two panelists are with us. I can only see Chris at the moment, but if our panelists, Chris and Joao and Marco, could join us, we'll open the next session.